What's up YouTube? Welcome to the first content on my new channel. This is Yugi Metrics, How to Win at Yu-Gi-Oh! With Math. It's a series I'm going to continue. I have a lot to say on. I've been really working on developing this, and I hope you guys enjoy. This is episode 1, which is an intro to Hypergeometrics. It sounds scary, I promise it's not. And of course it is hosted by the Upstart Goblin. That's me. So before we get into anything mathematical, let's talk about what YugiMetrics are. It's kind of a made-up word. I made it up. YugiMetrics involve the use of the probabilities to maximize the potential and consistency of your Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. So for example, you want to minimize the brick hands while maximizing the amount of plays that you can make on your first turn and later turns by changing the cards in your deck to mirror the best chances. So people will say, why is this important? Why can't you just play the game? Well, I like to make a comparison of Yu-Gi-Oh! To chess. Both are very similar games. They are focused around strategy and the players' wits going against each other and making decisions throughout the game. However, Yu-Gi-Oh! Differs from chess in that if you do it right, you can have your deck be way better than your opponent's, inherently giving you an advantage before the game even starts. And that's the main goal of YugiMetrics, to give yourself as much of an advantage as possible before the game starts, so that your plays can make sure that you win instead of trying to let you win. I'm a large advocate of the fact that having the better deck will usually allow you to win, and if you have the better deck, then the only way you're going to lose if you're outplayed. So stepping back from are you the better player, are you the better deck is more fundamental, I would say, but they're equally important. So I calculate the probability of my decks using a theory called Hypergeometric Distribution. I'm going to bring 4 variables and show you an equation. So first we have big N being the population size, little n being a sample size, K is the number of successes in your population, and X is the number of successes you want in your sample. You can put them into an equation that looks like this. Now this is highly statistical and it's pretty advanced math. So let's put it in more Yu-Gi-Oh! Terms, because I know you're all thinking this. So let's replace the big N's with D for deck size, H for hand size as the sample size, K is the number of any given card in your deck, and X is the number of any given card that you want in your hand. So when we replace those into the formula, you get this. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this C notation I'm doing, I'll explain that in just a minute. But what we're doing here, we're taking, when we do this combination formula, if N is a population size and R is a sample size, this NCR notation is saying of N options, choose R of them in any combination. So for an opening hand, we're going to do of 40, choose 5. Now the way we solve for this NCR, we put an N factorial over R factorial times N minus R factorial. That exclamation point means we're going to take the integer value of whatever that variable is, multiply by all integers lower than it down to 1. So for example, if we had 5 cards in our hand and we're choosing 2 of them, we put N as the number of cards in your hand, which is 5, R as the number of cards you're choosing, which is 2. So NCR would be 5CR. You plug it into the formula, you get 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 over 2 times 1 times 5 minus 2 factorial, which is 3 times 2 times 1. Do a little math and canceling, and you have 10 possible combinations of the cards in your hand. Now going back to the formula we just did here, you can apply that. A deck size is usually 40, so this big D in the bottom of the formula is usually going to be 40. And then H, I like to use my opening hand to calculate my probabilities to make sure that I'm doing the best possible opening and give myself the best chance from the get-go. So the bottom will usually be 40C5 unless you're playing a strange deck or you're contemplating the odds of getting a card when you're going second. So on the top, that first combination, KCX, that's the number of any given card in your deck. So we'll get to an example. We're just gonna move on and get to the example. So let's talk about my friend Firefist Bob. Bob's Firefist deck plays 40 cards. He wants to know in his opening hand, what are the chances of him opening one of his 3 Tenkies? So if his opening hand is 5 cards and he has 3 Tenkis in his deck, this same formula will show the probability of him getting 1 copy of Tenki. So let's plug in the numbers, and I color-coded it to make it easier to see. So you're doing 3C1 times 37C4 over 40C5. And those of you that have a TI graphing calculator, you can easily do this. The command is under Math, go to the left one, it's probability, and then you type in the number, then the NCR, which I think is Math Prob 4 maybe, and then the second number. So you would type 3 NCR 1, and it would give you the number of possible combinations in those numbers. So when we plug that into the calculator, we get that the answer is 0.301, which translates to 30.1% of the time Bob's going to open 1 copy of Tenki. So there are limitations to this formula. For instance, it can only calculate the probability of a single linear goal, and what I mean by that, it can only calculate, I'm going to open 1 copy of Fire Formation Tenki in the first 5 cards. And what this formula doesn't do by itself is accounting for card effects like Pot of Duality, Upstart Goblin, which we'll get to later, and then draw cards like Trade-In and Cards of Consonance. Those require more complicated variations of this. We'll get to those. So the other thing we need to look at here is Cumulative Hypergeometrics. It accounts for the possibility of multiple copies of the same card being in your opening hand. For example, this is Bob's goal. If Bob's goal is to activate Tenki first turn, a success would not just be opening 1 copy of Tenki, a success would also be opening 2 copies or 3 copies. So what you do to this, you add the probability of getting 1 copy of Tenki to the probability of getting 2 to the probability of getting 3 to get the probability of getting a copy of Tenki activated. So let's look at this. Here's Bob's Fire Fist deck again. This is what we already figured out. When we go to Fire Fist Bob Part 2, we see here's the answer we found before, and then the big formula is at the bottom. So now let's change the numbers a bit. We're changing this X to 2 because we want 2 copies of Tenkis in our opening hand. And since the H minus X after the second part of it is going to change because the X has changed, we change that to 37C3. So 3 cards in your hand out of the 37 that aren't Tenkis will not be Tenkis in your opening hand. And we find that the chances of opening 2 Tenkis in your hand is 0.035, which correlates to 3.5% of the time you're opening 2 copies of Tenki. Sorry, it's a typo. So then when we do the same thing for 3, we change the green number 2 to a 3, and we change the purple number 3 back to a 2, as there's only 2 remaining cards in your hand that won't be Tenki. And we find, as we suspected, that the chances of opening all 3 copies of Tenki is very low, only about 0.1%. So when we add these together, we find out that the chances of opening between 1 and 3 copies of Tenki in your opening hand is 33.7%. So there are things that we can do to alter this formula to make it apply more to decks that we'll see play, because not every deck is going to not run any draw cards, not run Pot of Duality, not run anything that changes the number of cards you see first turn. In fact, on the contrary, the best decks are the decks that can consistently be able to see more cards in their first turn. So if we calculate the probability of that and their consistency, let's take Upstart Goblin for an example. Since you're on my channel, and I am the Upstart Goblin, that's me. So what does Upstart Goblin do to this probability equation? Well, essentially it's going to change the value of D. You hear people say in the Yu-Gi-Oh community all the time that playing Upstarts is like running 37 cards, and they're right. Seeing as the probability does not account life points or any other factor besides how many cards are seen on the first turn, it's pretty safe to assume that every Upstart you're going to get on your first turn you're going to activate immediately. So essentially they might as well not be even there because you're going to be seeing another card in place of them. So playing 3 Upstarts in their deck really does change it from 40 to 37. So you might be wondering, how does this help beyond the obvious that you have a higher chance of drawing into your other cards? And well, that's pretty much all it does. But let's take a look at how much it helps. And we're back to Fire Fist Bob. So this is what we found out already. We found out that he has 33.7% chance of seeing one of his 3 copies of Tenki at least on the first turn. So if we change this and change the D value to 37 on the bottom here, which changes the d minus k in front of the second part of it to 34, we're going to find that his chance of opening one tanky is 31.9%, which is about 2% better than before. Adding it up to the chances of seeing 2 tanky and the chances of seeing 3 tanky, which you can see we use the same equations here to solve, we find that Bob is going to get at least 1 copy of tanky 36% of the time if he's running 3 upstarts. Now you might look at that and say 2.4% more of the time is not that great, but when you look at it in relative to what it was, it's going to give you another 7.1% increase in consistency. So that's actually pretty good. So thank you for watching this video. I'm going to post a bunch more talking about duality, draw cards, other cards that we can apply to this theory, and how you can change the consistency of your deck to give yourself the best opportunity to win in the future. So be sure to subscribe, thumbs up the video if you enjoyed it, comment if you have any questions, and you can always PM me or hit me up on Twitter at UpstartGoblin. Thanks guys.